Story 1. I don't know why I took this job. The pay was good. That's what I keep telling myself as I sit here, wrapped in 3 layers of blankets, staring at the empty can of soup I just finished. The job sounded simple enough. Photograph wildlife in the Alaskan wilderness for a conservation magazine. I've done worse gigs, weeks in damp jungles, or humid savannas crawling with flies. At least this was supposed to be quiet. But no one warned me about the storms. The snow started 3 days ago, and it hasn't stopped. At first, it was mesmerizing. Thick, lazy flakes tumbling from the sky, dusting the pine trees around the cabin like powdered sugar. But then the wind came, and the flakes turned into bullets. Now it's a full-on blizzard, the kind you don't walk out of unless you want to end up as a frozen corpse. The cabin is old, probably built in the 50s or 60s, and creaks like an arthritic joint every time the wind howls. The generator barely works, and the wood stove is my only real source of heat. I'm rationing supplies, stretching out what little food I have left. I've been stuck before, but this time it feels different. Because of the tracks. I first noticed them yesterday morning. Barefoot prints, leading in a perfect line from the edge of the wood straight to the cabin door. No snowshoes, no boots, just long, naked feet pressing into the fresh snow. They were so large they couldn't have belonged to a normal person. Each print was easily twice the size of my own foot, and the stride was impossibly long. I didn't open the door. Instead, I spent the day convincing myself I must have imagined it. Cabin fever, snow blindness, whatever you want to call it. But I didn't sleep well. All night, I thought I heard faint scratching noises. I told myself it was tree branches scraping against the walls. This morning, the prints were back. This time, there were more of them. They circled the cabin, pausing beneath each window, as if something had been watching me. I've locked every door and window. Not that it'll do much good, but it makes me feel a little less exposed. It's getting colder. The storm isn't letting up, and I'm running out of firewood. I thought I could wait it out, but now I'm not sure. I spent most of today digging through the cabin, hoping to find a hidden stash of food or something I could burn. That's when I found the journal. It was wedged behind a loose board in the bedroom. The leather cover was cracked with age, and the pages smelled faintly of mildew. The handwriting inside was messy and rushed, like the author had been in a hurry. At first, I thought it was just someone's old hunting log, dates, weather reports, notes about sightings. But then the entries changed. The writer, a man named Ed, began mentioning dreams. He described waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone or something calling his name from outside. He wrote about shadows moving in the snow and how the storm seemed to whisper to him. "It knows I'm here," one entry read. "It's waiting for me to come outside." The last few pages were illegible, just frantic scribbles punctuated by the word run, over and over. I closed the journal and sat there for a long time, staring at the stove. I don't know what happened to Ed. I don't know if he left the cabin or if something came in. The scratching is louder tonight. I tried to sleep, but it's impossible. The wind screams through the trees, rattling the windows, but beneath it all, I can hear that goddamn scratching. It's not random either, it's rhythmic, deliberate, like claws dragging in slow, deliberate patterns across the wood. I turned off the lights and looked out through the curtains, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever's out there. But all I saw was snow. Endless, suffocating snow. I set up my camera traps around the cabin this afternoon. If something's out there, I'll catch it. I'm scared. I don't want to admit it, but I am. I spent the day reviewing the footage from last night. The cameras didn't pick up any animals, no tracks, just endless snow falling. But here's the thing. The snow wasn't falling right. In one clip, you can see the flakes spinning in midair, twisting into strange shapes before falling apart again. At one point, the snow seemed to pulse, as if the ground itself was breathing. I think the storm is alive. I can't take it anymore. The scratching won't stop. It's coming from all sides now, a constant, maddening noise. I've barricaded the windows with furniture, but I know it won't help. I tried calling for help, but my satellite phone is dead. No signal, no power. I'm completely cut off. The journal said something about the storm luring people. What does that even mean? Is it trying to wear me down? Drive me insane? Last night I heard something new. A voice. It was faint, barely audible over the wind, but it sounded close. Too close. It wasn't calling my name, just repeating a single word over and over. Open. I didn't sleep. The camera footage, I don't know how to describe it. At first, it's the same as before, just snow falling in the dark. But then the snow starts to move, not blowing in the wind, but shifting, crawling, almost like it's alive. And then it happens. The snow piles in front of the camera, higher and higher, until it forms a massive shape. A face. Not a human face, though. It's too large, too angular, with hollow, gaping eyes and a wide, empty mouth. It stares straight into the lens for what feels like an eternity before collapsing back into the ground. And now I can hear it. That voice. Open. I think it's inside. Story 2. I don't think I've ever been this cold. The snow is a white wall in every direction, slicing across my face like a blade every time the wind picks up. It's impossible to see more than 10 feet ahead, and the trees, bent under the weight of the snow, look like twisted skeletons frozen in agony. My radio crackles uselessly in my ear, static and broken words from the other rescue teams scattered across the mountain. Anything yet? I ask, pressing the radio closer to my mouth. My voice is muffled by the scarf wrapped around my face, my breath freezing in thick clouds. Negative, comes a response after a moment, barely audible over the howling wind. But do you hear that? I pause mid-step, adjusting my snow goggles. The snowstorm roars around me, a constant low hum of chaos. But beneath it, there's something else. A faint melodic sound, almost like singing. I shrug off the thought. It's not uncommon to imagine things in these conditions. Your mind fills in the blanks when the world around you is nothing but endless white. It's the kind of disorientation that gets people killed out here, wandering off cliffs or freezing to death in the open. Still, as I trudge forward, it lingers. A soft, eerie harmony, rising and falling, barely audible but persistent. I focus on the task. 3 hikers went missing 2 days ago, last seen heading up the mountain trail before the storm hit. Young, ill-prepared for conditions like this. I've worked enough search and rescue missions to know how these things usually end. The cold doesn't forgive mistakes. But I've never heard of the cold singing. 2 hours in, the singing hasn't stopped. It's louder now. Not clear, never clear, but definitely closer. It seems to echo from all directions, like the storm itself is humming a slow, haunting melody. I radio back to base camp to report the sound, hoping someone else will confirm I'm not losing my mind. Yeah, we hear it too, someone says, their voice tight. Doesn't make sense though. Could be wind patterns or what? I press. Hell if I know. Just focus on finding those hikers. Over. The snow feels heavier now, clinging to my boots as I climb higher. It's like wading through quicksand. The singing grows louder with every step. I find the first sign of them around dusk. A scarf half buried in the snow, bright red against the endless white. It's frozen stiff enough to snap in half if I tried. There are tracks nearby, but they're strange. The deep grooves of boots mix with drag marks, as if someone had been crawling or pulled. The tracks vanish after a few feet, swallowed by fresh snow. I'm about to radio in when the singing suddenly swells, loud enough now that it drowns out the wind. It's coming from ahead, somewhere deeper in the forest. The melody is clearer, but the words aren't in any language I recognize. I don't want to go toward it, but what choice do I have? The tent is barely visible under the snow. At first, I almost miss it, mistaking it for a large drift. But the bright orange fabric peeks through the ice, torn and half collapsed. The snow around it is stained with something dark blood, maybe, though the cold has leached all color from it. Base, I found something, I say into the radio. My voice is shaking, and not just from the cold. A tent. Looks like it might be them. No response. Base. I try again, but all I get is static. The singing is so loud now that I can barely think. It's coming from the tent. I pull off my gloves and dig through the snow, the ice biting into my skin. The fabric tears easily as I pull it back, revealing the inside. And I freeze. They're all there. The 3 hikers, sitting upright in a circle, their faces tilted toward the sky. Their mouths are open wide, frozen mid-note, their eyes locked in a glassy stare. Frost clings to their eyelashes, their cheeks, their lips, but they aren't pale like corpses should be. They're flushed, almost glowing, like they're alive. Except they're not. They can't be. Their bodies are rigid, hands clasped together in unnatural poses. One of them is missing fingers, but they're still holding their palms together as if in prayer. Another has a large gash across their forehead, the blood frozen in an intricate, branching pattern like a tree. Their faces, they're smiling, but not in a way that feels human. The singing grows louder, almost deafening now, and I realize it's coming from them. Their mouths aren't moving, but the sound is pouring out of them, harmonizing with the storm. I stumble back from the tent, nearly falling into the snow. My hands are shaking so badly, I can't get my gloves back on. I grab my radio and scream into it, desperate for anyone to respond. Nothing. The trees around me seem closer than before, their twisted branches reaching down like fingers. The snow swirls faster, thicker, and I swear I see shapes moving within it, dark, humanoid shadows that disappear when I blink. I can't stay here. I don't remember how I made it back to base camp. The storm seemed to push me forward, the wind at my back almost carrying me down the mountain. The singing never stopped, though. It followed me, growing fainter, but never disappearing entirely. When I finally stumble into the camp, my relief is short-lived. The tents are still standing, but there's no movement, no voices calling out to me. The fire pit is frozen over, the ashes locked in a solid block of ice. "Hello!" I call out, my voice cracking. Then I see them. The other rescuers are standing in a circle around the fire pit, their backs to me. Their postures are unnatural, heads tilted back, arms raised as if in worship. Their mouths are open wide, frozen mid-song, the same haunting melody spilling from their lips. It's everywhere now, echoing in my skull, drilling into my brain. I clap my hands over my ears and scream, but it doesn't help. Then I hear it, my own voice, humming along. I can't stop, even as tears freeze on my face. Even as I try to run, my lips keep moving, my voice joining the infernal choir. And somewhere in the storm, I swear I hear it laughing. Story 3. When we first moved to the mountains, it felt like an escape. Fresh air, no noise, and no one who knows us, my wife, Laura, had said. Her voice trembled, but she tried to sound hopeful. We packed up our lives and left the city, driving into the snow-draped silence of this tiny town. No neighbors for miles. Just a white expanse of woods surrounding the little house we'd rented at the edge of a frozen lake. It was supposed to be a new beginning, but grief follows you, no matter how far you run. Our daughter, Evie, had only been 6 months old when she died. A sudden illness, the doctors said, nothing anyone could have done. But guilt is a cruel beast, and it had sunk its claws into both of us. Laura stopped smiling after Evie's funeral. Her laughter, once so easy, disappeared. Now, she spends most of her days staring out the window at the snow. Sometimes I catch her murmuring under her breath, like she's talking to someone. It was during the first big snowstorm of the season that I saw the girl. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when something caught my eye, a blur of movement in the backyard. I looked up and froze. A little girl stood in the snow, just beyond the porch. She couldn't have been older than 6, her dark hair whipping in the wind. She wore only a thin white dress. Her bare feet sunk into the snow. "Laura," I called, but my wife didn't answer. I opened the door, the cold rushing in and biting at my skin. "Hey," I shouted, stepping out onto the porch. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl didn't move. She just stared at me with wide, dark eyes. And then she was gone. Not like she ran away. She just vanished. One moment she was there, and the next she wasn't. I ran out into the snow, but there was no sign of her. Just tiny footprints leading away from the house, disappearing into the woods. When I got closer, I noticed something strange. The prints were already melting, water pooling in the snow around them, even though the temperature was well below freezing. I didn't tell Laura about the girl at first. What was I supposed to say? That I saw a barefoot child vanish into thin air? I convinced myself it was a trick of the storm, my tired mind playing games. But the next morning, Laura found me staring out the window. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft but wary. "Nothing," I lied. She followed my gaze, her eyes narrowing at the snow-covered backyard. "Were you out there last night? I saw you go outside." "Just checking on something," I said quickly, brushing past her question. She gave me a look, but didn't press. The girl came back the next night. I was in the living room this time, reading by the fire. Laura had already gone to bed. The storm was still raging outside, the wind howling against the windows. And then I heard it, a soft tap-tap-tap at the glass. My blood went cold. Slowly, I turned toward the sound. There outside the living room window was the girl. She was closer this time, her face pressed against the glass. Her breath didn't fog the window. She smiled at me, but it wasn't a child's smile. It was too wide, too knowing. "Evie," she whispered. Her voice was muffled by the glass, but I heard it clear as day. I stumbled to my feet, my heart pounding. "Well, what did you say?" "Daddy." My stomach churned. She sounded exactly like Evie. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "You're not her." The girl tilted her head, her smile never wavering. Then, without warning, she turned and walked away, her bare feet leaving those same melting prints in the snow. I couldn't hide it from Laura anymore. "She was here," I told her the next morning. My voice shook as I recounted the story. She called me Daddy. Laura stared at me, her face pale. But instead of looking frightened, she looked hopeful. "You saw her too," she whispered. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, too?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I've been hearing her. At night, when I can't sleep. I thought I was going crazy, but if you saw her—" "Laura, it's not her," I said firmly, grabbing her hands. "Evie's gone. Whatever this is, it's not her." She pulled away from me, shaking her head. "How can you say that? What if it's a miracle? What if she came back to us?" That night, I woke to the sound of the front door opening. I shot out of bed, my heart racing, and ran into the living room. Laura was standing in the open doorway, snow blowing in around her. The girl was standing on the porch, smiling up at her. "Laura, stop!" I shouted, but my wife didn't even flinch. She held out her arms, and the girl stepped forward into the house. The air grew colder instantly, frost spreading across the floor. "Laura, don't touch her!" I yelled, grabbing my wife by the arm. But it was too late. The girl crawled into Laura's arms, curling against her chest like a child seeking warmth. My wife hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "She's so cold," Laura murmured, rocking the girl back and forth. "Let her go," I shouted, trying to pull her away. But when I touched the girl's hand, a sharp pain shot through my skin. It burned like dry ice, searing my fingers. I recoiled, staring in horror at the girl. Her skin wasn't skin. It was compacted snow, flawless and smooth, yet impossibly cold. Her dark eyes glittered like black ice, and that smile never left her face. "Laura, she's not human," I screamed, but Laura didn't respond. Her breath came out in visible puffs, freezing midair. Her skin was turning pale, cracking like frost on a window pane. "Laura!" I shouted, shaking her, but she was staring at the girl, her face frozen in that same wide smile. The girl looked at me, her black eyes glinting, and whispered, "Daddy." By morning, Laura was gone. The frost-covered floor was the only evidence she'd been there at all. I searched the house, screaming her name, but I already knew it was useless. When I stumbled back into the living room, the girl was standing there alone. She was smiling at me, her small hands clasped in front of her. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice breaking. The girl didn't answer. She just tilted her head, like she was studying me. And then she said, "Daddy," her voice soft and sweet, but empty. "She's still here. I don't know what she is, but I know one thing for sure. She's not Evie. And now she won't stop smiling at me." Story 4. It wasn't a good night to be out driving. The snow had come out of nowhere, thick and fast, coating the roads in white within an hour. I probably should have stayed home, but after the second text from Uber about surge pricing, I figured I'd chance it. Rent was due in a week, and I was behind. Most of the night had been slow. A couple of short rides across town, the kind that barely make it worth the gas. I was about to call it quits when the request popped up. A pickup from the edge of town, heading deep into the woods. The address was unfamiliar, and Google Maps didn't even show a proper road, just a long stretch of forest with no clear destination. But the fare was too good to pass up. The 3 passengers were already waiting when I pulled up. They stood in a cluster at the end of a snow-covered trail, their figures half obscured by the swirling snow. When they climbed into the car, I immediately noticed how strangely they were dressed. No heavy coats, no gloves, just thin, old-fashioned clothes that looked more suited for a funeral than a snowstorm. One of them, a tall man with a gaunt face, wore a suit that looked like it hadn't been in style since the 1950s. The woman next to him had on a black dress with lace sleeves, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. The third passenger sitting directly behind me was harder to look at. Every time I glanced at the rearview mirror, my eyes slid past him, like my brain couldn't process his face properly. "Rough night for a drive," I said, trying to break the silence as I started toward the woods. None of them responded. I cleared my throat, the awkwardness settling in. The car was dead quiet, except for the sound of the tires crunching through the snow. About 10 minutes into the drive, I started to hear them whispering. It was quiet at first, almost like the sound of wind sneaking through a crack in the window. But as I focused, I realized they were talking to each other in hushed, urgent tones. "The rules," the woman was saying. "If he chooses wrong," the man replied. Their voices were low, too low for me to catch every word. "Everything depends on..." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, pretending not to hear. The air in the car felt colder than it should have. I cranked the heat, but it didn't seem to help. The GPS led us to a narrow road, barely wide enough for the car. The snow had swallowed most of it, and the trees loomed close on either side. I almost told them I couldn't go any farther, but something about their silence made me keep driving. Eventually, we came to a clearing, and there it was, the house. It didn't look like it should have still been standing. The wooden walls were warped and splintered, the roof sagging under the weight of the snow. Most of the windows were boarded up, and the front door hung slightly ajar. "This is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. The man in the suit nodded. "Why don't you come inside?" The woman said, her voice smooth but cold. "The storm's getting worse. You shouldn't drive in this." I glanced at the swirling snow outside. She wasn't wrong. The storm was picking up, and the road back would be treacherous. But something about the house, about them, made my stomach twist. "I'll wait in the car," I said. The man in the back seat leaned forward, his breath fogging the glass between us. "You won't make it out there. Come inside." There was something in his tone, something final, like he wasn't giving me a choice. The inside of the house was even colder than outside. My breath fogged in front of me as I stepped into the dimly lit living room. The furniture was ancient, the kind you'd see in a museum, and everything smelled faintly of mildew. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, blocking out the storm. The 3 of them sat down at a round wooden table in the center of the room. A deck of cards sat neatly in the middle, the edges worn and yellowed. "Sit," the man in the suit said, gesturing to the empty chair. "I really should." "Sit," he repeated, his voice sharper this time. "You sit." The woman smiled at me, her teeth unnaturally white. "We play to pass the time," she said, shuffling the deck with expert precision. "A friendly game to keep warm." "What kind of game?" I asked. She tilted her head, considering me. "Let's call it a game of stakes." The first round was simple. Each of us was dealt a single card. Highest card won. "What are we betting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Memories," the woman said, smiling again. I laughed nervously, waiting for her to explain, but she didn't. The cards were dealt. I drew a 5 of spades. The man in the suit had a king. The second the round ended, a sharp pain shot through my head, like an ice pick stabbing my brain. I clutched my temples, gasping as flashes of my life flickered in my mind. Faces, names, places, all of it slipping away. When the pain stopped, I couldn't remember my mother's face. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, standing up. The man in the suit pointed to the chair. "See, or forfeit everything." The next round, we bet warmth. I lost again. This time, the cold seeped into my body, deeper than I thought possible. My fingers turned numb, my skin pale and stiff. I felt like I was freezing from the inside out. They didn't seem affected. If anything, they looked livelier, their faces flush with color. I don't know how many rounds we played. The game became a blur of cards and stakes, each round taking something more from me. My sight dimmed until the room was nothing but shadows. My memories slipped away, leaving me grasping at fragments of who I used to be. Then I noticed a man across the table. He wasn't just staring at me. He was me. Or at least he looked like me. Older, hollow-eyed, his face drawn and pale. He smiled at me, a slow, knowing smile, and I felt my stomach churn. What are you?" I whispered. He didn't answer. The final round came. I had nothing left to bet. "You," the woman said, dealing the cards. "You bet yourself." I drew a 2 of clubs. The storm outside stopped instantly. The wind fell silent, the snowflakes hanging motionless in the air. I blinked and found myself standing outside. The house was gone. I looked down and realized I was wearing the man's suit, my hands thin and pale, my breath fogging the air. I couldn't remember how I'd gotten there, or who I was supposed to be. In the distance, another car approached, its headlights cutting through the snow. Story 5. The storm hit just as my shift started. I'm new to this job. A rookie snowplow driver with less than a month of experience, assigned to clear the roads no one else wants to touch. Tonight, that meant Route 57, a winding mountain road infamous for avalanches and hairpin turns. Locals call it the Dead Man's Spine. I didn't know the name when I signed up. If I had, maybe I would have stayed home. The snow came down heavy, the kind that makes the world feel like it's being swallowed. Visibility was already bad when I started, but now it was almost nothing. My headlights carved out a narrow tunnel of light in the swirling white, and even that felt like it was being eaten alive. The radio crackled in the cab. "Route 57's yours tonight, rookie," my supervisor had said earlier, his voice laced with static. "Keep it clear and watch for slides." That road's got a nasty habit of biting back. I hadn't responded, just nodded and tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The road was worse than I expected. Snow piled up faster than I could clear it, and the wind shoved at the plow like it wanted to push me off the mountain. My wiper struggled to keep the windshield clear, the glass frosting over faster than the defroster could handle. About an hour in, the radio cut out. Just static at first, then faint bursts of what sounded like a man's voice. "Turn," the voice crackled, barely audible. I adjusted the knob, trying to clear up the signal. "What? Say again." The static hissed, and the voice came through again, clearer this time. "Turn back. Don't further." A chill ran through me, and not from the cold. "Who is this?" No response, just more static. I should have listened. The first car was sticking out of a snowbank, its rear end jutting into the road like a warning. I stopped the plow and climbed down into the freezing wind, pulling my scarf tighter around my face. The car was an old sedan, the kind that probably shouldn't have been on a mountain road in the first place. The front end was buried in the snow, and the windshield was cracked, a jagged spiderweb stretching across the glass. Something about it didn't feel right. The driver's side door was open, hanging slightly ajar. I shined my flashlight inside. The first thing I noticed were the claw marks, long, deep scratches gouged into the interior, as if something had been desperately trying to get out. The second thing was the frost. It coated the windows and seats in thick, intricate patterns, like someone had frozen the car from the inside out. On the driver's seat, the outline of a body was burned into the frost, as if someone had been sitting there long enough to leave an impression. But there was no one inside. No blood, no tracks leading away. Just the empty car and the swirling snow. I radioed it in, but the static was worse now, and I couldn't tell if anyone heard me. After a minute of trying, I gave up and climbed back into the plow. As I drove on, the storm seemed to grow heavier, the snow falling so thick it felt like driving through a tunnel. The headlights barely lit the road ahead, and the trees on either side looked like ghostly figures reaching out of the dark. The second car was worse. It was an SUV, parked in the middle of the road as if the driver had stopped and gotten out in a hurry. The windows were completely frosted over, but the doors were all locked. I peered through the driver's side window, wiping at the frost with my glove. Inside, the seats were filled with snow. Not just a dusting filled. It looked like a snowdrift had formed in the car, the seats and dashboard buried under at least 2 feet of powder. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The snow inside seemed to shift as I touched the handle, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move beneath it. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The storm screamed around me, the wind almost deafening. My flashlight flickered, and in the brief darkness, I thought I saw something at the edge of the trees. Something tall, its outline blurred by the snow. When the light came back, it was gone. I climbed back into the plow, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, and I forced myself to take deep breaths. I decided to turn back. Whatever was happening on this road wasn't worth the paycheck. But when I tried to reverse, the storm seemed to push against me, the wind battering the plow so hard I could barely move. My headlights flickered, and in the brief moments of darkness, I saw them. Shapes in the snow. Humanoid but wrong. Too tall, too thin, their limbs impossibly long. They moved with the storm, their outlines shifting like smoke, appearing and disappearing as the snow swallowed them. One of them was standing in the road ahead, directly in my path. I slammed on the brakes, the plow skidding to a stop. The shape didn't move. I sat there, frozen, as the headlights illuminated its vague, shifting form. It had no face, no features, just a towering silhouette made of snow and shadow. Then it stepped closer. The plow stalled. The engine sputtered and died, leaving me in total silence except for the sound of the wind. The figures surrounded the plow now, their massive forms pressing in from all sides. I locked the doors and huddled in the cab, my breath fogging the glass. The temperature dropped rapidly, frost creeping across the inside of the windshield. My flashlight flickered weakly, the beam barely piercing the dark. The shapes didn't move closer. They just stood there, watching. I don't know how long I sat there, curled up in the driver's seat, praying for daylight. When the storm finally cleared, the plow was buried. I woke to find the cab encased in ice, the frost so thick I couldn't see outside. My breath was slow and labored, the air thin and freezing. I managed to chip away at the frost with my keys, just enough to see out. I wasn't on the road anymore. The plow was surrounded by layers of ice, the outlines of the figures frozen all around me. They were closer now, their faces, or what passed for faces, pressed against the glass. They weren't moving, but they were still watching, waiting for me to make a move. Thanks for watching. If you like the stories, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.